Firstly, I'd like to talk about this gesture right here, the palms exposed gesture. Hague uses it a lot when he's talking about good intentions or when he's using an idea where he's trying to convey that it is for the benefit of the people. Lots of people and public speakers, politicians, they use this kind of gesture when they want to portray honesty and credibility. Okay, so watch the way and when he exposes his palms while he's talking.
Because we're trying to avoid worse things happening.
So now, as you can see from the camera, it's just below the camera, his palms are exposed just now. So he says we're trying to avoid worse things happening. His palms are exposed as soon as he gives the sentiment that we're trying to help the people, this is in terms of Iran. So he's saying we come with good intentions, we're trying to stop worse things happening. Second time this interview is here.
Discussing. So no, what we want to see is negotiations. We want to see this resolved through negotiations. The framework for negotiations is there, what we call the E3+3, negotiating with Iran. The offer of negotiations is there, and it remains there. And we encourage Iran to respond positively to the.
So it remains there, the negotiation framework is there, we encourage Iran to go through the negotiation process. All of those phrases he says is accompanied with him exposing his palms, a show of openness, a show of a willingness to cooperate, and that's displayed in his body language as well. He does it in this clip as well.
What we are saying, what most people want in Britain, actually, in our judgment, and what we want, is a better relationship with Europe. That actually it wouldn't help achieve that if you had a referendum on staying or leaving. Right. Now.
So if you just, I'm going to replay that because I'm not sure if you saw that. Because when he said, he aligns his party with what the people want, first of all. And then he says what we want is to have a better relationship with the EU. And that's when he exposes his palms. So again, he's saying, we're doing this with good intentions.
Staying or leaving. Right. Now, because if people voted to leave, of course, it would have all the great disadvantages of leaving the single market and all the other.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's back here.
That actually it wouldn't help achieve that if you had a.
There we go. There it is. It wouldn't achieve that. And if you can see from the edge of the camera, his palms are out. So it's saying it won't achieve that, but what we want will achieve that. We're coming with good intentions. He does it again here.
Well, it's about come back on in this country, and in the end, the people will have their say.
So in the end, the people will have their say, and his palms are exposed when he says that. So he's saying again, we're doing this with good intentions. It'll be up to the people and what they want.
It is an entirely fair question, and of course it's often difficult for people contemplating doing these things to answer all those questions because you can't give away all the plans.
So he's saying again, well, naturally, because it's a military operation, we can't give away all the plans because that would also have security implications. So again, he's exposing his palms to say, this is fair of us, it's for the security of the people, we're doing this with good intentions. He does it here again.
Stability in the Arab world, but again, we mustn't be put off by that from keeping faith with millions of people in the Arab world who want the dignity and freedom that we have in our own country.
So again, dignity, freedom, democracy, these ideals are associated with open palms, openness, good intentions, positiveness, and things like that. So next I want to talk about this.
The Union has set out a graduated series of measures.
So whenever he talks about progress, gradual, or evolution, his hands seem to go from the left-hand side of his body to the right-hand.
The European Union has set out a graduated series of measures.
So when he says gradual series of measures, his hands move from his left to his right. He does it in this video again.
To do so.
And all I'm saying is
but they are a rising cost to Russia.
A rising cost, so again a gradual thing, and it goes from his hand goes from his left-hand side to his right-hand side. He does it in this video too.
You are greater than the risks of doing so in a limited and proportionate and careful way.
Limited and proportionate and careful, and you can see at the bottom of the camera his thumbs and therefore his hands are going from the left side of his body to the right hand side of his body. Lastly, he does it here again. And you can watch when he's the first kind of phrase he talks about, his hands quite quickly go from the left to the right, but nevertheless they do go from the left. Now I want to talk about this gesture here. In my notes I've called it Hague's wall, because he uses this a lot, and it's kind of he's creating a wall with his hands, and it creates a barrier with his body, and he usually uses this gesture when he's using words or suggesting ideas like protection, isolation, or when he's trying to disassociate himself or his government from a certain idea or activity. And he does it in this video, if it loads. Okay.
Including Russia, getting more and more deeply drawn into it, even though they do protect.
So even though they do protect, so he's talking about Russia protecting Syria, and that's when the war comes up. It's about protecting or diplomatically watching out for another party, taking care of them. He also does it in this video.
Classic dilemma in foreign policy. Do you engage, do you go to a country and argue with people there, or do you try to isolate them? And there's a legitimate...
So if you saw then, when he said isolate, the wall came up again. And so again, the wall means isolate or cut yourself off from something. Or protect yourself in that case as well. He does it again here.
We believe that that will have a better impact than sitting in London and not being there.
So again, the wall comes up when you're talking about sitting in London and isolating yourself. In this clip, he's talking about the Chogam in Sri Lanka. So he's talking about the wall comes up when he's talking about the possibility of isolating themselves from the situation and just staying in London and not going. And that's when the wall comes up. So again, isolation, being cut off from the situation. He does it in this video again. Actually, you can see it forming right here.
He's explained we're not against referendums per se.
So we're not against referendums per se. So he's disassociating himself from that idea. He's blocking himself quite literally from the idea that the Tories would be against referendums per se. He does it again here.
First of all, there are no combat troops at all
so far
in this deployment, and
So there are no combat troops in this deployment, so he's disassociating himself again from the idea that there are troops in wherever he's talking about. I think he's talking about Afghanistan here. So he's isolating himself from that idea. Again, because humans aren't robots, they didn't do exactly the same thing every time. This is an example of how he uses the wall, but it has nothing to do with isolation, protection, or staying away from anything. Next I want to talk about this.
What point is defending armed rebels protecting civilians? Well,
I want to talk about specifically the word well. I think Hague usually uses it when his interviewer speaks to him in a very confronting manner, or in a provocative or accusing manner. So watch out for when he says well, when he's coming up to when he's responding to quite a question that the presenter gives in quite a confronting tone or a menacing tone.
Well, give me some tangible outcome.
Oh wait, I'll just turn the sound up.
Some tangible outcome that you expect, you demand to see as a result of having been there.
Well, there are many things that we want.
So if I go back and hopefully show you the body language of this presenter.
Been there.
It's very confrontive. He's pointing at William Hague. His tone is very high, quite loud. He says, give me some evidence of war crimes that you would take. He begins his sentence with well. Is it here again?
So at what point is defending armed rebels protecting civilians? Well, it has been...
So also a very confronting tone, assuming a lot about what the British government is doing, supporting rebels, and again Hague begins his sentence with well, and has a tisk as well before. Here again.
Germans. Why do we need to spy on the Germans?
Well, that's a bit of your...
So again, a very confronting question. Why do we need to spy on the Germans? It assumes a lot, and again he begins his sentence with well. Here again. A very confronting tone from this interviewer too.
Britain pioneered putting sanctions on Iran's central bank. Are you now the one engineering the oil embargo?
Well, we're part of the strong...
So again, he's saying, the interviewer is saying that The British government engineered the sanctions. Are the British government now engineering the oil embargo? So accusing them of using coercive diplomacy and being very aggressive in their policy. And again, Hague starts his sentence with "well." And lastly here.
Obama says, quote, "A decade of war is ending." That's what he said in his inauguration last month. You say the world will be a more dangerous place over the next decade or two than the last decade or two. Now, you both can't be right. You must think the president's wrong.
So again, he's comparing Hague's statements to the statements of Obama, and saying that both of them are saying contradicting things, that only one of them can be right. And he says it in a very confronting way. Look at his body language again, the presenter, and also his tone of voice was very aggressive. And again, Hague begins his answer. Next, I want to talk about this gesture here, which is where Hague tilts his head specifically to the left. He usually tilts it when the person who's interviewing him speaks about something negatively, maybe a country or a certain negotiation he's involved in. It sends the message, "I'm thinking about it," or it even sends the message, "I'm listening, I hear your concerns." Sometimes it's a display of sympathy, sometimes it's a display of understanding.
Human Rights Commissioner Navi Pillay has complained of two things. One, that the regime is becoming autocratic, that it's sliding downhill, it's not going uphill, it's not improving.
So we're talking about the concerns that Navi Pillay is having, negative connotations. Hague's head tilts to the left.
That in fact matters are getting worse. And the thing she's really particularly angry about is that people the UN speak to
Now his head's tilt back towards upright or slightly right.
then get molested by
Here he says again, when you talk about negative circumstances in a different interview.
Well, if you're in Tehran, you're an average Iranian family. You see a regime, a government, which is not even elected by that.
Here we go again. His head is leaning to the left. You're talking about the dire circumstances of a normal Iranian family with the Iranian sanctions going on.
That particular family, for example, and the West engage in this conflict. What do you expect that family?
Now his head's kind of gone back to the normal area of his neck. It's also done here as well.
Because so far, in concrete terms, all we've talked about are things like visa bans and visa.
So he's talking about the inadequacy of the policy towards the Russians, and Andrew Marr is challenging him by saying that the policies have so far been inadequate. Again, negative connotations. I'll show you again. His head also does a twitch to the left.
Will mean this has been a serious miscalculation.
Because so far, in concrete terms, all we've talked about are things like visa bans and visa discussions. What about, for instance, kicking Russia out of the G8?
So as you can see, his head did tilt a little bit to the left, and it just came back to the right. He also does it here again. I'm going to get rid of these because the windows are making the video more slow.
As a free or fair
But
referendum.
they don't care, do they, Foreign Secretary? When it came to the suggestion that there should be more talks with Kiev, President Putin's...
But they don't care, do they? And then that's another negative thing. He's elaborating on his negative point, Andrew Marr. And again, William Hague's head goes to the left.
spokesman last night literally laughed.
And then lastly, at the beginning of this interview, and then 9 seconds into the interview, he's also tilting his head. As you can see, his head's tilted slightly to the left.
You've heard Paddy Ashdown speak there. He says there will be
Now his head's gone kind of more to the right.
consequences, and he didn't expect the lack of cooperation that there.
Again, negative connotations, the lack of cooperation, messiness. Next I want to talk about this gesture here, when he gestures to himself. When he says "I," he often uses his left hand, and his left hand fingertips touch the lower area of his.
Now, I'm not going to set out today what all of those are. We will act in a
Left hand to left chest, you just saw it there.
on Europe. We've often advocated them. We have introduced that act. I've often said there have been too few, not.
So when he says "I," he gestures to himself with his left hand onto his lower chest.
I've introduced that act. I've often said there have been too few, not.
And that's again left hand to left side of the chest.
dangers for Britain if we left?
Well, my view is that we should stay in the...
So in my view, and then when he gestures to himself again, his left hand goes to the lower part of his chest. But because humans, they aren't robots, so they don't do exactly the same thing all the time. Here's a demonstration of how he gestures to himself with his right hand.
Ethics come to me or the Home Secretary personally. It's not something we delegate to a Jew.
So obviously, I've looked at quite a lot of footage about him, and a lot of the times he uses his left hand to gesture to himself. But obviously, it's a pattern. There are deviations from the pattern because we are human. So this is an example of... He uses this gesture here with his hands. It's a kind of toppled steeple where his fingers are pointing at forward. He uses this gesture a lot when he talks about specificity, concentration, focus, things like that. He uses it in this. I'm going to give you two examples. This is from one interview with the Persian BBC service.
We've not ruled out any options or supporting any options, but I think this is a specific case.
So he's talking about one specific case, and this gesture comes up. He does it again in this hearing. This grey thing here, I can't get rid of it, but this is exactly where his hands will be when he does that gesture. So I apologise, but please have a look in this area when he's doing it.
Since then. Now, I don't in any way rule that out in the future, but you'll understand that our concentration is on these negotiations with the E3+3B.
So you can see our negotiations are concentrated, and his hands are in this gesture. I hope you can see it because of this white thing, but his hands are doing this precise gesture. His thumbs are up exactly the same here, and his hands are slightly apart. These ones are together, but very similar gesture. Last but not least, I want to talk about lip licking, for example in this clip. I hope it plays well.
In the case of Iran, there is a great...
So there's a little lip lick he does there, and he usually licks his lips when he's talking about regretful or grave situations or something.
World. But of course, in the case of Iran, there is a great...
So if you saw the lip lick there.
Greater danger even than we have seen in North Korea because of the effect on other countries.
So it has two lip licks there, and it's to do, the topic is the possibility that the sanctions in Iran have great danger to Iran and also countries in the region itself. So again, a grave situation, a negative situation. Here's another example.
We are dealing with the deaths of tens of thousands of people, a diplomatic solution that has eluded the whole world.
So again, he's talking about the death of thousands of Syrian refugees and civilians, and about how there's been a lack of diplomatic, or the diplomatic negotiations haven't been successful, and then there's another lip lick in a regretful situation. He does it here again.
As it's spoken, there was a great reluctance for MPs to vote even for the rather mild motion that we were putting forward. The opposition behaved, I have to say, in a rather opportunistic and partisan way.
So again, he's talking about the regretful situation that the British opposition in Parliament acted in a way which wasn't cooperative, perhaps. So another regretful situation. Another example is here.
I think it's right to suspend the sanctions rather than remove them completely. We're not intending to reimpose them. We're hoping that no situation will arise where we would be asked to reimpose them or want to reimpose them. But in it...
Lip lick. So he doesn't want to impose sanctions. He's talking about Myanmar or Burma, and about how Britain would be regretful for the UK to put sanctions on Burma again, because Britain has, like he says in this video, led the way quite a lot in re-engaging with Myanmar or Burma. He does it in this video again.
Countries do change, and I'm in no way underestimating the challenge and the scale of abuses, human rights abuses, in this case. As I say, do countries sometimes change through positive engagement and pressure from the rest of the world? Yes, they do. Burma, in recent times, of course, we have led the way among European countries in visiting the regime in Burma, accepting their sincerity in wanting to change and encouraging them to do so. Have terrible human rights abuses been committed there? Yes, they have. But it hasn't stopped.
There we go. So he does it here again with a regretful situation. Have human rights abuses been committed? Lip lick? Yes, they have. So he licks his lips, again talking about a regretful situation. However, humans aren't robots. They don't do exactly the same thing all the time. And here is an example of him using the lip lick when it's not got anything to do with a regretful situation or a particularly sad situation. I'll show it to you.
Less stable. If you think about the immediate aftermath of the Cold War, think about the 1990s, before 9/11.
There we go, I hope you saw it. After he said 1990s, he did a lip lick. He's about to talk about the Clash of Civilizations idea, so it's nothing to do with regretful sentiment or anything. He's just, he seems quite confident in this video actually, so obviously he's using the lip lick in a different setting. Because, I mean, humans use it, even the same human will use it for different reasons, but there seems to be a pattern where he's using it often in regretful situations where his mind is going back to a regretful situation or something that was unfortunate, like the opposition not being cooperative or Syrian civilians being killed. The next behaviour I'd like to look at is this behaviour right here, where you can see William Hague's thumbs. He's twiddling his thumbs or moving his thumbs, interchanging them. I can't find an explanation or an emotional reason why he would do that. Perhaps excitedness. I mean, he's in Parliament and he's in questioning, so it's very interesting. I'm not sure, but it's just an interesting observation that he seems to do it quite often. So watch his thumbs closely now.
Assuming the election result and the election of the Conservative Party. Secondly, the question was not about sterling, but about government debt, to which I will return in a moment.
You could pay attention to the pace, because I think when he gets more excited or more happy or more confident, I think they move a little quicker. He does it in the same video here as well.
The longer there is not a credible plan that sets out what actions will be taken on the public finances, there is a risk. If she doesn't know about...
So here only his right thumb was moving, but still his thumbs were kind of, I guess, rubbing each other or touching each other. And then in this video, the same video again in a different place.
Does she agree with what the Prime Minister said some years ago, that a weak currency...
And he does it in this video as well. Just watch his thumbs, it's shown now as the camera zooms in.
Crimea, at least. And there's nothing that we are going to say or do that will change that.
Well, that is clearly their intention. What we want to see is...
So while Mara is asking the question, his thumbs are moving together, twiddling, is what people call it. He does it in a lot of other videos, but it's very brief, so I didn't want to show all of them. Usually when somebody's asking him a question, he will do that. Maybe it's linked to when he's thinking or anticipating what he's going to say. I'm not sure. I did a small discourse analysis of what kind of words William Hague uses. He uses some audio phrases, some kinesthetic phrases, but mostly it's visual phrases. I just realised I spelled kinesthetic wrong. Oh dear. But he uses mostly visual phrases. He uses the word see a lot. See or seen. He also uses phrases like, so that the regime gets a clear signal. I have any party that I have seen working in detail seen again. Looking at things in a different light, he says. Shine a spotlight on something. Other phrases he uses which are visual are, we want to see what we want to see as a negotiation. If you look at what we're all saying. If we are highlighting further the ... he says that. So there's a lot of visual words in his discourse generally. Anyway, thank you for watching, and wherever you are, I hope you have a great